Hello and welcome to the third Lights Out Racing podcast with our coverage of the 2013 Malaysian Grand Prix. Okay, so we're back after another race, and what an interesting race it turned out to be. So, because there is going to be so much to talk about during the race, we've had to cut down the news section just a little bit. So, let's get straight on with the news roundup.
Yeah, certainly. So the first news article that was picked up this week was Fry is to step down as CEO of Mercedes.
And we'll be having a look whether the 2013 Pirelli tyres are making the races more exciting or more predictable.
Okay, so first up is the fact that Fry will be leaving Mercedes, and it looks like Toto Wolff is going to take over the management responsibilities. And I just wonder how that's going to affect the organisation of the team going forward.
I wonder if this might be slightly better for Ross Brawn, as obviously with Toto Wolff coming in and possibly Lowe moving over, it looked like he may have been pushed out, but it might be now that Nick Fry is the person to leave the team, who makes a bit more space for possibly all three of those to work there together.
So how I'm sure I could probably go on a website and find this out, but I'm just wondering how we think it's likely going to lay out going forward. So I presume it's Toto Wolff at the top, and then are we talking a very flat organisation underneath him where you've got it will be Brawn, Lowe, and Niki Lauda, or is Niki Lauda equal to Toto Wolff, but as a non-executive? I suppose I'm a little bit confused as to how the organisation will be laid out in the future.
I think until they actually tell us how it's going to be, it's all pure speculation. I think we can't really call what it's going to be. But I think now that Nick Fry's gone, it does leave it a little bit more open. There's not so much for Toto Wolff to do at the lower level, so there might be that gap there for Lowe and Brawn. But who knows? It might be that, or they might be just lining up Lowe as a Brawn replacement at some point.
There's an idea. It does seem to suggest at the moment there's an idea that they could work together. Otherwise, Brawn would probably be saying, "Yep, this is my last year here," or "We'll see." But we don't really know what's going to go on in the background. But certainly interesting times at Mercedes. They certainly really want to be pushing in the next couple of years. One thing I was thinking though, how do you think it would impact the development of the 2014 car, if at all?
That's a good question actually, because you would hope to think that it would all be in place earlier on. So if they would have to, if Lowe was going to be heavily involved in it, they'd have to be signing him now and then looking at sort of halfway through this season to be having one eye on next year's car. So I don't know, maybe that's where they're looking at coming from. Maybe they want to replace Brawn with Lowe for next season and have an eye to bringing Lowe in this year just so he can actually start working on next year's car. But I'm not even sure if his McLaren contract will allow him to do that or not.
I don't think, based on my very light research, he can actually join this year. He's certainly on some form of gardening leave now, which would suggest he's certainly going over. But I think only time can tell really. But it would be interesting to see what the overall strategy is about, whether they are forming this organisation, for instant success in 2014, or there is a long-term plan there.
Okay, so our other story was, are the new tyres a good or bad thing for the sport?
Yes, indeed. Well, we see since Pirelli have come in, they've certainly developed tyres which have a very specific, what's the best word to describe it, operating temperature. Yeah. Very much of a surprise, I think, last season for everyone, but they certainly, the team certainly found a way of trying to work with them towards the end of the season. Now, I'm a bit split on this personally, because I can kind of see from last season where it was very, very interesting, all the way very up to the end in terms of how it was impacting the teams. But you were able to sort of glean an understanding from the top teams, especially, that they kind of got a handle on those tyres. So you have that, but then you also have the point that, well, actually, if we keep making them more unpredictable and keep making them drop off, or have a smaller or narrow operating window, that it actually becomes more down to luck rather than skill. So it is a tricky question.
And I think as well, sort of going back to your first point that you made there, the teams getting a handle on it last year, is that, are we just seeing the same again? Basically, the teams don't know enough about the tyre compounds this year, and it's going to be a learning process. Or have Pirelli brought superiorly inferior tyres this year that are just falling away a lot quicker? I think that's something we're only going to see as the season actually pans out.
Pirelli suggests that the tyres are working as we thought. So unless they're they're blagging a little bit, they certainly seem, if we take them at the word for it, that they're saying they're operating as expected and they're happy as it. So I suppose they've got an idea of how or what the temperatures are to operate within. So it's a bit tricky, because I suppose the other point of view is that if you have tyres that are generally very unpredictable, that everyone starts from, I don't know, say a zero position at the beginning of having hardly any understanding or very, very low from testing, aren't the top teams still going to have a better chance of getting a handle on those tyres more than, say, for example, the middle teams or the back end teams? Because obviously they can just chuck more people and more skills at it. It's, what's the objective of these tyres? Is it to make it generally a more level playing field, or make it more interesting at the front?
I think it's going to be, well, the angle that they're coming at it from is to make it more interesting racing, because I think it was Bernie Ecclestone used Canada in 2011, possibly, I think, as the example, where the tyres were basically just falling off, where they expected to get to the end and the tyres fell off so dramatically, people were making pit stops left, right and centre. And he said that's what he wanted from the sport and that's what he expected from tyres. And I don't know whether Pirelli have taken it a bit too literally and are bringing tyres that just basically fall apart after a shorter distance than they could do. But the one thing that does concern me about it, and I'm not really sure how this benefits Pirelli. I know it's good for them to be the official sponsor to Formula One, but would you want to be known for a tyre that falls apart after not a very long distance, and racing teams having to manage your tyre because it degrades so quickly? I'm not sure that's really a good advert for Pirelli.
Yeah, but then again, I suppose they haven't. I take your point, but I suppose they haven't really made any suggested any otherwise, that they're not going to have a tyre that's going to be reliable and not work. I suppose they're saying, we're intending this to make it more exciting racing. End of story sort of thing. Aren't we clever? I suppose I see what you're saying, but they probably balance that by showing or thinking they show their technical ingenuity by saying, look at how we can get a tyre to operate in a very specific temperature, but collapse either side.
Yeah, and we determine when it's going to collapse as well.
Indeed.
So we control the longevity of the tyres. They're not running out quickly because they're made badly. They're running out quickly by design because this is what we've been asked to produce. Yeah.
I mean, going back to whether it's really a good thing, it does concern me whether we get to a point where no doubt I think there is a very fine line that they're looking to tread here by ensuring that it doesn't become too unpredictable. And yes, interesting racing, but at what level? Is it across the board? Because what we're already seeing is, perhaps this could be just down to car performance, but we are still seeing the top teams really come to the fore. In the next few races, we'll certainly get a better understanding of how the teams are getting a handle on the tyres and whether they can design the cars to suit.
Yeah, I think it definitely is a very, very thin line they're walking between. What they don't want to be doing is actually dictating the races by how the tyres are lasting. So you don't want to influence the race or the actual outcome of the race by the tyres. You just want to make it more interesting why it's going on. You want teams to adapt to that. Like I said, I think as teams get a handle on the tyres, maybe we'll see a bit more of them being able to do that.
Very much so, and I think just finally, I think what we will look to see is, when we discuss qualifying and racing, though, is that compared to Melbourne, the tyres did seem to last. We'll have a little bit more longevity with them. I do worry about the super soft tyres, though, and their practicality in races where Pirelli will use them, if they use them going forward, because you could find that a lot of teams are just going to get shot. They use them for qualifying and then just get shot of them for the race, because I probably would, looking at the fall-off rates that they had. So it should be interesting to see.
I think maybe the problem with those, I think possibly it might have been not a bad call by Pirelli, because obviously they can't predict exactly what's going to go on. Yeah, I think the track was too cold for the super softs, and I think that's where it went a bit wrong. So I don't think they're quite as bad as they showed up to be in Australia, because it was supposed to have been a hot race. They were expecting to bring tyres that suited that and not the cold, wet conditions they actually ended up having. Right, so that will lead us through into the predictions section. So, Carl, who have you got for pole?
I've got Sebastian Vettel in pole. I think, proof after Melbourne that I think over one lap Red Bull still have the fastest qualifying car.
Yep, no, that's fair enough. And who do you think for the win?
Well, I'm going to go on the basis that Red Bull eats its tyres slightly more than Ferraris. I'm going to go with a win for Alonso. Okay, so Tony, in terms of your predictions, who do you think is going to be on pole?
I'm going to put Webber on pole, I think, for pretty much the reason that he always seems quite quick in the wet, and he doesn't like Australia, so I'll rule that one out for his qualifying. But when we've had sort of China, Malaysia, those sort of races before, when they've been a bit soggy, Webber always seems to come to the top there and do quite well.
It's fair enough. Who do you think's actually going to win the race?
I am also going to go for Alonso, I think, for pretty much the same reasons. I can't see the Red Bull's tyres lasting the distance because they just were so bad on them in the practice sessions. Okay, so I'll go and get out honorary third host's predictions. So, Jess, who do you think is going to be fastest on Saturday?
Lewis Hamilton.
And who do you think is going to win the race on Sunday?
Kimi Raikkonen. So, Danny, who's going to be fastest on Saturday?
I think Mark Webber.
Okay, and who's going to win the race on Sunday?
Fernando Alonso. Okay, so that's the predictions done, and that will lead us through into qualifying. First of all, we'll have a look at Q1. So, as usual, we've got both Mauritius and both Caterhams out in Q1. But one thing did stand out, and that was the performance of Jules Bianchi. He was nearly a second up on pick, and over a second quicker than his teammate and the other Caterham of Van der Garde.
Yeah, very much so. Jules Bianchi was a 1:38.434 and Charles Peake was 1:39.314. Max Chilton in 21st position was actually 1:39.672, so quite significantly faster than his teammate. It certainly bodes well. I think if Bianchi keeps knocking those times out for the rest of the season and obviously is ahead of the Caterhams, I think other teams will certainly be looking at him. Who knows whether Ferrari may see him as a viable replacement or a team in the mid-pack might want to take him going forward. But no, generally a very impressive performance from Jules there.
Yeah, well, don't forget he's the Force India, or he was the Force India test driver as well, which he would have been doing this season. So if this doesn't secure him a Force India seat next year, I'm pretty sure it's going to ensure him a seat further up the grid.
Yeah, consistency will be the key, I think. But no, it's very good qualifying by him.
Okay, so the other two spaces in the Q1 drop zone were filled by Bottas and Verne, only coming in about 2 tenths quicker than Bianchi as well, which was slightly surprising.
Says it all really for the performance for Bianchi in Russia, but I think Williams would be particularly worried. I think they were hoping, to be into the mid pack, starting to go off the back of the Force Indias, Lotuses or Saubers, but they seem well down still at the moment. Whether that's got anything to do with the later testing that they had with the new car, who knows? But it's certainly not where they want to be going forward.
Yeah, I think we may be a little bit harsh on especially Mauritius last week, saying they hadn't really caught up the midfield. They look like they're just nipping on their heels now.
Okay, now moving on to Q2, Grosjean and Di Resta seem to suffer most from the sudden rain shower that hit, or certainly in parts of the track. Sauber looked like they struggled to keep up with the rest of the cars, even in the dry conditions, which I think was a bit surprising. McLaren certainly seemed the main benefactors from the rain, as they set average times in the dry that other teams behind couldn't improve upon with the subsequent rain that followed.
Yeah, I think with Grosjean and the rest, everyone else got their banker laps in quite near the beginning, so got a reasonable timing, like a reasonable dry timing. So as soon as the rain come, they were just unable to repeat any of those times and were always going to go out from there.
Banker laps, I'm going to use that more often.
And we also saw as well Di Resta having a couple of major spins as well, trying to still put in a time on dry tyres when the track obviously wasn't there to do it.
That's a good point. Yep, he spun around quite a few times on the corners and was bemoaning strategy and the tyre performance as a result in his interview later on. So yeah, shame for him. It's also a strong car, but I think that was pretty much it for Q2. I think. Yeah,
so of course because the Inters are so much slower than the slick tyres. When it started raining, even with the Inters on, you were never going to do a time that you could do in the dry. So like we say, as soon as they come into the garage, no one was coming back out again in that session. So. That was that pretty much the story of Q2.
Okay, in a summary from the back towards the front, the people that went out in Q2 are Pastor Maldonado, who didn't set a time, Esteban Gutierrez, Daniel Ricciardo, Nico Hülkenberg and Roman Grosjean.
Okay, so that leads us into Q3, where all the teams come out on inters. Despite the fact the rain had stopped, it was still quite a wet track, but drying quite quickly. Hamilton set the pace in the early laps as soon as he come out on, I think, his first flying lap. He went fastest, and then it all started to change when Vettel pitted for a fresh set of inters.
Yeah, I think it was a very good call from Vettel, to be honest. I think when he had the choice to come in and decide what tyres he was going to put on, he obviously put on a fresh set of inters at that particular point. And I think it's always a tricky call because with the track drying out, there's always a chance that you want to choose to go on slicks, or other teams could have chosen to have gone on slick tyres and obviously had the jump on him. So for him to do it at that point and then really to crank out a lap towards the end, which was by far quicker, certainly showed he had the right choice. I suppose the only other logical choice was what Lewis effectively did, which I think is also understandable. Is just stay out with the set of inters he had on and try and put the best possible time in on those.
Yeah, I think as well that the problem Mercedes had was, well, I think they made the gamble that the track was going to dry out. I think they were trying to hold out as long as they possibly could on that set of inters and then go for slicks for one flying lap at the end. But of course, as we know, the track just didn't dry out in time. I think given another 5 minutes, they would have been on slicks, but the track just didn't come to them. So they were stuck out then on those used set of inters, which in the end, like you say, the grip proved for Vettel, and he got the fastest time on a new set.
Do you think Mercedes did have or did lose out on some places as a result?
Yeah, I think so. Had they covered what Vettel done, I think the top three would have looked very different. It may have even been a Mercedes 1-2 at the top, if I can push it that far.
I suppose that's 2020 hindsight, isn't it, really? It's easy for us to say afterwards.
So, yeah, the shelf life in terms of laps of the inters is very, very limited, so they're going to want to get a new set on there as quickly as they can, or as often as possible. They're going to want new ones on there. But I think the gamble that the team took, which was quite a unique scenario, was the track was almost dry, but just not quite enough, I think. Okay, so that left the top 10 looking like this. We have Vettel in first, followed by Massa, then Alonso. Hamilton, Webber, Rosberg. Raikkonen, Button, Sutil and Perez.
Okay, we're going straight into the race now, and oh my goodness, I think the afters of the race were as interesting as the race itself. I must admit I was a little bit worried to begin with that the race would be a little bit processional, but it turned out to be anything but, in perhaps not in terms of the result itself, but everything that happened in between. And I certainly think if you watch the race without the sound on, it would look like that. But I think judging by what happened during, in terms of the radio communication, what happens afterwards, it's certainly a race we could go on talking about for ages. But what I'd suggest we probably do is just firstly we talk about the initial start of the race. We saw Webber having a fantastic start, which got him into a very good position, which we'll cover off in a bit. But I think the main key point of the early part of the race is really Alonso's, which seemed to be a mistake, colliding into the back of Vettel. Which knocked his front wing, and eventually that was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, quite literally, with his front wing imploding a lap further down the line. So that was actually a rare mistake by Alonso, and one which ultimately cost him the race.
Yeah, I think this was a very strange one, especially the fact that it gave way literally just after he'd passed the pit lane as well, with the chance to come in and actually change it as well. So
I don't quite understand that. Is that something which a team... I suppose it's based on team, but is that a team call? Is that a driver call? Can it be either?
It's hard to say. I wouldn't like to say who opted for him to stay out, but it was quite obviously the wrong decision. But if it was a team call, I find it quite hard to believe that Alonso wouldn't have known he did have that amount of damage to the front of the car and wouldn't have just brought the car in himself. So regardless of whether the team told him or not, I would have expected to have seen him just coming in through his own decision at the end for a new nose anyway.
Certainly seemed like you'd have a lot of understeer as a result. And I think I do wonder about, normally that's uncharacteristic error of judgment, I think, from Alonso. I'm wondering what could be the cause of that.
Yeah, it does seem quite strange, because I would have thought as well Ferrari wouldn't have wanted to take the risk that he would have been disqualified, because running around with your nose cone scraping along the floor, spraying up sparks, could, I would say, be quite close to a disqualification if you chose not just to completely ignore it and carry on.
Yeah, I would imagine it's quite dangerous. A lot of the other teams were able to radio in, it seems, to say, oh, he's got a problem, watch out for him, bits could be flying off at any given moment.
which is what I think they would have actually disqualified him for, the very fact that bits could have broken off at any time and gone flying in any direction.
Indeed. So yeah, I suppose only Ferrari will know. But it looks like it's certainly evened up the top of the table at the moment as a result. Okay, so next on the agenda is Force India's problems with their pit stops. Seemed like a consistent problem for both drivers, with looked like wheel nut problems.
Yeah, I think that was it. What the owner, Vijay Mallya, was saying at the end was they were trying out new wheel nuts for this particular Grand Prix, and they don't seem as if they've quite worked out.
No, do you think it's more an operational problem as well, or do you think it's pure design of these nuts?
From what they were saying, it sounded like the wheel nuts were going in okay, but when they were trying to actually release the wheels to change them, they weren't coming back out. So at one point, I think they actually had two wheel nuts on one wheel, which was what caused the retirement for Paul di Resta.
So basically they retired them because they weren't 100% sure that the wheel had been fixed on sufficiently.
I think they may have actually broken part of it trying to get the two wheel nuts off, or actually done some damage to the car there. So I think they had actually retired through the damage they had done, trying to then subsequently release the nuts from the wheels.
It's a shame because they seem to be going quite positively, and I think for the Resta's point of view, it's a chance to get one over on Sutil effectively in terms of teammate challenge and to get ahead of him in the race. But I think obviously with the mistakes of that pit, and I think with Sutil eventually retiring as well, they've really missed out there to try and get progress more further ground with McLaren as well.
Yeah, because they definitely looked like before the pit stop they were storming through the field. They were making quite good progress, but also as well their first pit stop they had similar problems before the retirement one, where I'm guessing again the same problems with the wheel nuts not coming off properly. But both cars had to stack there, so Paul di Resta was sat behind Sutil for a long time there waiting for Sutil to be released from the box. So both drivers lost a lot of time there, fell back through the field. But like you say, were looking so strong on race pace, they were actually making a charge up through the field before the second pit stop and eventual retirements of both cars. And on the subject of dodgy pit stops, we had Lewis Hamilton pulling up into the McLaren pit box as well.
Very much so. It certainly seemed like old habits die hard, and I think it looks like the McLaren pit staff team had a wry smile on their face, just waving him on.
I don't think it was quite the disaster of Jenson Button pulling up into the Red Bull pit box where everyone looked quite angry and wanted to get him out of the way. I think it was slightly more good-humoured, I think, with Lewis pulling up into the McLaren one.
I think they instantly knew what happened. I think it was quite obvious, but as you say, I suppose when you're so focused as F1 drivers need to be, you just go on what you physically see and you react. That's all I can say is the cause of that. We know it happens, so I think he'll be a little bit embarrassed, but I think we just move on, I think.
Well, I was going to say, I think probably in his defence, that is the only thing he's known for all the time he's actually been in Formula One racing as well. So that's a lot of years that he's got to try and break the habit of what he's been doing and what he's been looking for in the pit lane. And To be honest, I can understand it because I don't know about you, but every time I see Sergio Perez with his yellow helmet in a McLaren, I automatically assume it's Lewis Hamilton anyway. So,
yeah, it's a tricky one.
And we had yet another dodgy pit stop as well, as the Toro Rosso team released one of their cars into the path of an oncoming Caterham.
Yep, they certainly didn't want to muck about, did they? But they mustn't have an unsafe release, and I think it's one of those. It seems to be happening quite often still. It's strange. I mean, I thought someone was dedicated to stand there and basically make sure that there's no oncoming cars. I suppose.
Yeah, that is the job of the lollipop man to check to make sure there's no one coming and that it's safe for release.
I suppose if you're looking at competitors or potential cars that are in and around you, do you try and judge it just to the right time to ensure that you can bring your car out ahead, or is that what they were perhaps doing there? I mean, I'm not too sure about the positions at that point in time, but because I can't see any other reason why they would want to do that, or they would just make sure that the car was safely passed before releasing the Toro Rosso.
I think in all fairness, it's quite a hard judgment call. They've got to judge the distance, the length, various different things of the ins and outs of the pit boxes, and I think, to be honest, they just get it wrong sometimes. I think today was just a case of they were trying to get the car away quick. They thought they could sneak out, and obviously the Caterham was coming in a lot quicker than they anticipated.
Is that why some of the teams have gone with the traffic light system? Does it take that sort of thing into account as well?
That was, I believe, the idea behind the traffic light system. But of course, we saw that I think it was Ferrari had that malfunctioning, didn't they, at some point as well? So that would release the drivers too early. So It's all, again, I think as well, the traffic light system is actually triggered by someone to say it can go as well. It's not an automatic thing.
So it's still human judgment at the end of the day.
Yeah, I believe so. I think they did want to introduce at some point where all the wheel nuts would lock onto the car, and that once they were all done, that would trigger the traffic light system. But it obviously wasn't very reliable because we've never seen that used. It's all still, say, just manual lollipop men or a person making the decision when to release. And of course, as well, we also saw Jenson Button being released with his front wheel not bolted onto the car.
Yes, indeed. I'm not sure if he pulled away quicker than he should have done, but what certainly happened was I noticed one of the engineers did a cross arm, which I think it means a failed attempt. And they did seem though that they reacted very quickly on the radio to Button to say, look, you have no wheel attached. And I think replays showed that it was wobbling all over the place. So
yeah, I think he must have noticed that as soon as he pulled out of the pit box.
Yeah, you can probably feel that sort of thing. I would have thought. You're right. That's a good point. So yeah, more pit problems start to come back from McLaren, it seems, and hopefully they can try and resolve that. But I think it's a fair point to say that if it was an error, do you think it was an error by the pit team? Or
I think there was an error in releasing him because, of course, the car should have been jacked up at the front for the wheels to have been changed. So the fact the car that had been dropped. I believe they thought that the wheel was already on when obviously it wasn't. So there must have been a bit of miscommunication there. Whoever his job it was to release Button at that point obviously hadn't seen that the front wheel or the front wheel man hadn't given the signal to say his wheel was on correctly.
Interesting comments from Button afterwards. He felt that he could have challenged for Mercedes for some places this race if it hadn't been for those kind of problems. So, which I'm not too sure about. I mean, he certainly was going quite well. He was making his tyres last, but yeah, a bit of a tricky one to try and call that one, I think.
Well, I think what they were going with was they could get away with one less pit stop than everyone else. So obviously they had a big chunk of time there. So they didn't have the pace of the Mercedes, but they would have been right up there with them at some point. I think what Button was trying to say was that the Mercedes would have actually had to have overtaken him at some point.
Right. So talking of Mercedes, it's the classic team challenges I think we've seen in this race where, well, it certainly seems that Rosberg felt he was significantly quicker behind Hamilton in third place, and obviously Rosberg in fourth. And, for some time towards the end of the race, he was saying that he felt he was faster. Very clear direction from Ross Brawn to say that's a negative, Nico. And I felt it seemed like obviously Ross Brawn took the decision to preserve both cars and not have them risk colliding into each other.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think the team orders. I think that's been the elephant in the room, isn't it, for the podcast so far? So yeah, this is going to be the big story of the day for both Mercedes and Red Bull. So yeah, we'll have a look at the Mercedes one first, I think. So yeah. I personally think this was a slightly dodgy decision. I don't think either of the drivers wanted it to pan out this way. And to be honest, I think both drivers would have been a lot happier had they just been allowed to swap places.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think from my perspective, I think this says a lot more about communication. I think let's just go back to understand perhaps the cause of it. It seems that Hamilton, for reasons we don't quite know just yet, from what we can tell from the interviews coming in, of why they were particularly sensitive about the fuel usage, whether they just simply didn't have enough fuel to begin with, whether they were a little bit too aggressive, or they were just simply finding the car was eating a lot more fuel than they anticipated, meant that at the particular point where the race was pretty much playing out to the positions that the cars were going to be in at the end of the race, that the Mercedes or Brawn seemed to make a decision that, okay, that's how it should stay. The interesting point around that is that, okay, Hamilton may not have necessarily been in control of that, what we're not too sure about, but it's interesting that they were swapping places with each other a little bit before that, weren't they? They were overtaking each other in the DRS zones.
Yeah, Rosberg had closed in and overtaken Hamilton on a few times, but every single time Hamilton had reclaimed the lead, so Rosberg was not an out-and-out faster car. When he had the opportunity to get the overtaking done cleanly in the earlier stints, he failed to do so. So that may be a little bit of a defence of the decision from Ross Brawn.
Noticed the commentary guys were withholding who was overtaking who at any given point because I don't think they were sure because of the yellow helmets. But yeah, it looked like after that, that's what seemed to have prompted the decision to say, you know what, we're staying where we are. We've played our hand.
Yeah,
now,
I think. Sorry to jump in on you. I think from what I could make out from the interviews, the agreement had been whoever was in the lead at the last stop they would hold stations on that. That was what was Ross Brawn certainly alluded to in the interview. That's the way the agreement they had in place for the drivers, which also led Rosberg to say, had positions been reversed, I'm confident the team would have done the same for me as well.
Indeed, it's very hard to understand. However, I'm just basing this on the evidence of Lewis's comments at the end. I mean, as Ross Brawn said, well, Lewis can go faster as well. Yet it does seem that Lewis understood that he probably wasn't as fast as Nico. And going back to your original point, that it certainly seemed that both drivers seemed a little bit disappointed with the result itself. Fair play to Lewis to admit on the podium that it shouldn't have been him there. It seemed the decision was even out of his control. So, because what I was thinking of is it just the fact that Rosberg was on a fresher set of options, whereas, as the radio communication previously stated, Lewis was on scrubbed options. Whether that had a big impact, I suppose we'll never know. But it is interesting about the call that was made and how that is ultimately going to affect the relationship going forward. Because in contrast to the Red Bull situation we'll talk about in a minute, the body language of Rosberg did seem to be a little bit more positive in terms of just sort of taking it on the chin and saying, "Yep, that's the way it goes. It's team decision, and I follow that."
I think that's quite a rare thing to say, because I think even when we've seen other teams in the past, Red Bull comes to mind definitely, where they've supposedly imposed team orders in the past and they've all been followed to the letter. The driver having the team rules, imposed on them, namely Webber, has not been that happy about it, and of course as well at Ferrari as well, another team that springs to mind. Whereas when we've seen Massa being told to move aside, he's shown that he's not been very happy with having to do that. So I think hats off to Rosberg for, out of all the people who've had team orders imposed on them, probably taking it on the chin the best, and like you say, showing the best response and the best attitude going forward for it.
As a driver, you're in the heat at the moment, you're going to sound annoyed, I think, on the radio that, I'm much faster, what's going on? Unless the team has made it quite clear. I suppose the only thing I do struggle with is if that team order has been put in place at the beginning of the race, why are drivers then questioning it, in the heat of the moment? Is it because they're just forgetting or they don't quite understand what they think? Because I think if that's been discussed at the beginning at Mercedes, then why is Nico Rosberg saying, why can't I pass Lewis?
From my understanding of what Rosberg said at the interview at the end, I believe that he still thought he had a chance of catching the Red Bulls, and that was where the opinion differed.
I see.
Because
right.
From Ross Brawn's point of view, all he wanted was a McLaren 3 and 4, and he wanted them in that order. It didn't matter which order.
Mercedes.
He wanted that in that order, and that he wasn't interested in whichever order they came in at. And from Rosberg's point of view, he still thought he could challenge for the lead, whereas the team didn't believe he still could.
Right, so he, whilst he understands the team orders, the potential is he's saying, well, can I have permission to do so because I think I can catch the Red Bulls?
Yeah, that's it. That's what I think he was asking for. He said, I'm so much faster. Please, let me go through and let me have an attempt at the Red Bulls. He didn't want. I don't think he just wanted the ability to pass Lewis. I think he actually wanted the ability to go on and race Vettel and Webber up the field as well.
I see. Yeah, so it should be interesting to see the ramifications of that. I think we'll see in the coming races whether that's had any impact. But I suppose out of the two incidents, if I should call them that, it certainly seemed that there's been a bit of catharsis with Lewis and Nico, and that I think they've resolved it to a point where I think it's going to work. They know each other a lot better, and I think they'll have a chat. And I think that certainly seems like it could be better managed going forward. Whether they take the same strategy next time is another question, I think, and only time will tell.
Yeah, it's the same as we said at the beginning of the season about Ferrari. They've said that they would do the same for each driver in each particular circumstance being the same. So if the roles are reversed in another Grand Prix, we can only wait and see. But who knows? I feel they probably will, and I'm hoping that they will, because looking at both the drivers' body language, like I say, I don't think either of them wanted the outcome today, and they would have been far happier if they had just been allowed to swap positions.
That's a good point. I think, this is where I go back to my point of communication. You see, I suppose it's easy to say in hindsight, and you have a very competitive pair of drivers there, but why isn't the question broken to both of them? I know they can't speak to each other, but via the team principle, Ross could say, right, Nico, we can see you're faster there. Lewis, we've got a fuel situation here. We are where we are, but Nico looks like he can press on. He doesn't have that issue for whatever reason. What are your thoughts? I don't hear that coming through the radio. It may have been, it may not have been, but and then they say, well, say for example, if he said yes, okay, that's fine, and you say, right, okay, next DRS position, then allow the faster car through as a result. And I think if that's the case, then surely there's no risk or very little risk of them coming together if it's been agreed. Now, that is a conversation that takes 20, 30 seconds to have overall.
Yeah, so they had many laps to sort that out, so they definitely had the time.
Exactly, and I just simply don't understand why that couldn't have happened. So, perhaps the team, I'm not saying this is the case in any stretch of the imagination, but perhaps there is a mindset on future races. Do Mercedes feel that Lewis Hamilton is a safer bet for the season, even though Lewis himself doesn't want to be put as a de facto team leader or number one driver? And I wonder if that does influence the decision as well. But we'll never know that for sure.
Or maybe even another sort of slight slant on that as well is possibly maybe it was the team's fault that he was underfueled, and it was almost like we know we've made the error. We don't stand to gain anything. We can't race the Red Bull. So as a little apology for not putting enough fuel in your car, or for giving you the wrong engine mapping earlier on,
quite possibly.
We'll basically, take it we'll take that we messed up, we didn't put the fuel in, so we're going to make sure you don't suffer even at the hands of your own teammate for our decision, basically. Maybe it could be something to do with that, but we don't know. Without knowing the fuel loads that went in beforehand and why Lewis was so low on fuel, because we heard Hamilton's radio a couple of times saying that you have to coast now, not even save fuel. It's literally, I think at some points they did wonder whether they were even going to get to the end of the Grand Prix with Hamilton.
Absolutely, and it would certainly be interesting to see how that pans out for the rest of the season in terms of how they manage it. Because personally, I feel that could have been, more communication. I think, obviously in hindsight, would certainly have helped the situation there. But it certainly seems that I think I'm confident by the body language of both drivers and the team principal that it does suggest that they can resolve this in good time for China in 3 weeks' time.
Yeah, you would definitely hope so. Like I said, I think all in all, everybody's played the team role today, I think, and as long as they all remember they all drive for the same team, once the team asks them to do something again, like you say, you would like to think that they would all do it in the best interest of the teams, and roles reversed, Lewis would do the same for Nico as well. So we go from an elephant in the room to an entire herd of elephants in the room with Sebastian Vettel completely ignoring team orders and blasting past Mark Webber for the finish.
It certainly seems that way, doesn't it? It seems that they had a clear team order in place. I think Mark Webber referred to it. Is it multiple 21? Whatever that means.
Yeah, sorry. I believe that's engine saving mode, would be my guess.
Ah, right. Okay. So when they're both told to do that, perhaps that's when they then keep team orders. But so to put it in context, certainly Mark Webber had a fantastic start, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, and he was pretty much, very much in control of the race. There were a couple of good instances previous to the main incident, should we say, where he was fighting with Vettel and other cars. But he certainly looked in control. But it did seem, obviously, I believe he's on the hard tyres, and Sebastian Vettel was on option tyres. It's certainly very clear on the radio commentary that I think the team made or restated their arrangement very clearly to Vettel, and he just chose to basically do the opposite to what Rosberg did, basically, in my opinion, and just chose to say, well, to hell with the team orders, I'm going to go for it. He needs to give chance, I think, for Seb to explain, but it doesn't look like he's going to explain any further, judging by the interviews that he's given. He said that he will speak to Mark and the team privately, which I can understand, but it really, this really doesn't, help his the PR side and the media side of things for his championship this season, because everyone's going to be looking for this to contribute to ultimately him leading the championship, which I think it now does. And it is a very tricky one, because ultimately there is no shying away from the fact that it does seem that he's clearly disobeyed team orders.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think he did. It was obviously clearly a team order, because I think, was it 3 or 4 times on the radio at different points we heard his race engineer telling him to either calm down, or I think at some point it even said, "Come on, Seb, this is stupid." So it was quite clearly he was definitely going against orders that were set. But maybe the only thing that he's got to defend him was he was disobeying them because he believed that they were wrong, or believed that he was that much faster that he was going to take it into his own hands anyway. And maybe, I think this is going to be his defence, that he didn't know Mark Webber was engine saving, possibly.
Yeah, that could be quite a feasible occurrence. But I think, is there a chance here where he thinks, or he automatically assumes now that, okay, this is my team? I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth, but it suggests, based on his actions, suggests that whilst the team orders are there, if he thinks he's faster, he takes the decision in his own hands and says, well, so for example, if he is thinking in this way, and I'm not suggesting he is, but if he says, okay, I'm really the unsung or unstated team leader here, I'll just do it and manage the consequences going forward, because it does suggest that.
I think that's definitely Mark's mindset as well. I think he very strongly believes that although on paper Vettel isn't the number one, he can just do what he wants to do and he'll get away with it and get protection from the team, as Mark put it. So I do believe that he thinks that none of them come out and openly say that Vettel is the number one. He's above the law, which might as well make him the number one. If he doesn't have to follow the rules, then he's bigger than the team, he's bigger than team orders, and he'll always be put in front of Mark, because it seems that Mark thinks that anything he does, he will be held to account for, and maybe that's not the same with Vettel.
Yeah, it really does put, I think, the difficult slant on Seb and how people view him. I think certainly in the next few races, depending on what happens, because. Okay, so the big difference here is obviously with Ferrari, it's very clear that they impose team orders, although in my opinion it's not clear about when they choose to impose those team orders. And I suppose it's this, what's quite significant with this piece is that it is uncooperation, I think is the term. He's not choosing to cooperate, he's not choosing to play by the arrangements, and if you don't do that, you become a bit of a loose cannon. You become someone which is quite untrustworthy, or someone who they just don't know, okay, we've told him, is he really going to follow it this time?
I think the thing is this even becomes bigger than team orders, because I think we've never had a situation like this before where, or not that I can remember, in this sort of bigger occurrence of somebody having team orders imposed on them and then not following them. Generally, people complain because they've had team orders imposed on them, but they still follow the team orders. In this case, we have the team orders being imposed and then being directly broken as well. So we've got the double whammy, if you like, of the team orders. Were they not right? But like I say, I can't remember a situation where it's been the orders that have been put in place have been this blatantly broken.
I mean, if someone was to turn and say, well, okay, well, in Turkey it was Vettel that came off worst as a result, and that's just payback. Okay, but the problem I have with that kind of viewpoint is that. That doesn't make either situation right. It's not it's like a transactional thing where because you did that to me in X, I can do this in Y. And whilst the reaction probably could be a little bit more constructive, Webber does wear his heart on his sleeve, and he's got to. I think he's managed it a little bit better than he has done in the past. One of the situations I remember in the past is where he slammed that glass down in the press conference, and the water went everywhere, and he kind of nearly did that in the driver's preparation area before the podiums.
I think from the little clip I've seen of the conference, I've not seen the whole driver's press conference, but he had I think it was a glass of orange or something like that, and I think he got pretty close to doing the same again this time.
Yeah.
But I think the problem, maybe very slightly with Mark, is he's not. Although he's completely in the right this time, as far as the situation goes, I don't think he's handled it as well as he could have done, because he's not done similar in the past. But when he's been told to back off and not challenge Vettel in the past, There's been instances where he's maybe pushed him a little bit harder than he should have done for a teammate. So to now he's on the receiving end of it, to come out quite as strongly as he has done. Like again, maybe it is all in the heat of the moment and you can understand it. And once he's calmed down, he'll probably have a look at it and say, okay, yeah, it wasn't right, but maybe I shouldn't have gone quite in off the deep end as much as I did. Because again, I think Red Bull should maybe have a little look at Mercedes and say maybe our drivers should have both handled it a little bit more like that. And again, I think that brings into play a little bit of the comments of Herman Marco afterwards as well, saying, "Oh, at Red Bull we clearly don't have number ones in our team like Mercedes do, so we're going to have situations like this." That kind of attitude, when it's I don't know. I think it's a little bit of very, very hypocritical from Helmut Marko to come out and say that straight away after the race as well. Why it's still going on and everybody's still heated. So
does sound a little bit on the defensive, but I'm never sure with these owners or these bosses whether they actually mean the team they say. I mean, I'm not trying to cut him any slack or anything, but you do wonder sometimes who they're referring to. But yeah, no, it did certainly suggest it's quite defensive. But I'm more interested in what do you think they can do about imposing some sort of will they fine him? Will they? I don't know. What could they do? Because it does raise quite a rare occurrence where I think, in my opinion, I think the team have a valid point to put in some form of punishment in place.
Yeah, I think going back to your point earlier on about him actually becoming a loose cannon, and if he's not prepared to listen to anybody in the team, Vettel this is, that what really can you do? Because he obviously is that quick of a driver that he will get a good race seat elsewhere, but the problem is, and this is a story we did have lined up for the news that we had to cut to obviously make room for everything that went on in the race. Would Vettel be as good a driver outside of Red Bull, or is it the combination of Vettel and the Red Bull that keeps it winning? Could another driver do that? And I think maybe if I was Christian Horner, I'd maybe sit Seb down and maybe say to him, rein it in a little bit and remember that you're not the only thing here. The team is bigger than if you disobey the team, you may be looking for a drive elsewhere in the near future.
It is a big problem for them because the irony is they're telling somebody off who's won them a race.
Exactly. Yeah,
and it's a really difficult situation, and I'm by no means, agreeing or thinking that that's okay, that Seb can carry on as he is, because he's undoubtedly going to be one of the main contenders for the championship. It's not the point, but the problem it does leave Red Bull, as I think you're suggesting, is that they're punishing someone who effectively is now leading the championship. It's that possession is 9/10 of the rule, as I think Damon Hill mentioned about the fact that he's done it now. And as Mark Webber has said, there's no rewind button now. You can apologise all you like. The fact of the matter is that he's taken advantage of that. Now, whether that situation is as unacceptable if it was a Ferrari, where people do seem to assume that Fernando Alonso, in my opinion, has the undoubted team order number one, irrespective of the results. But obviously, we'll have to see about how they behave and confirm that throughout the season. But it's certainly here is there is an agreement to follow the rules, and if you don't do it, what is the punishment? I think it is one of the things about communication, about if you set up responsibilities and tactics and plans with your drivers beforehand, perhaps it might be something for teams to also put in. And if you don't do it, this is what's going to happen, because I think that's the only way you can possibly rein this in going forward.
Well, I still honestly believe, I think Vettel is going to fight his corner, saying that he made an honest, genuine mistake and believe that he was that much faster than Webber. It was his right to go quicker and that he didn't believe it was in there. So again, maybe he can try and dodge a kind of punishment like that. But like I say,
can you though? Because I'm thinking, I understand what you're saying, because he would undoubtedly say something like that. I agree. But you can say, well, okay, what part of sticking to the team order did you forget then? Because it is one of those. It is one of the quite black and white in this case.
I think this is where it needs to go about not what does he do in the race, but how is his attitude in general. I think this is why Christian Horner needs to sit him down and say, look, we're not going to take too many of these. Whether you think you're faster or not, if we tell you to do something for the team, you will do it because it's for the team. And if you're not going to do something for the team, maybe you might not be part of this team in the future, because although he is, like I say, it's going to be a horrible decision for him to make, because he is undoubtedly, on his day, he's the fastest driver in the grid. We've seen him sail away with so many, just sail off into the distance in so many races and win them. He's without doubt the fastest on his day. And Webber in the same car hasn't done that, so he doesn't have that. He doesn't carry that kind of weight that Vettel does. But it's again, that tricky balance. How can they really punish somebody if they don't want to lose them? What can they do to them? They can't find the money because the drivers aren't interested in that. They're rich enough that it makes no difference to them.
Yeah, very much so. I think if there's anything, I mean, looking into the wider context of the race, not too sure. It's very hard to say about how Ferrari would have performed. You know, the Massa is a good indication. I think it looks like they may not have been able to challenge the Red Bull so much either. Whether they would have gone ahead in Mercedes, I just can't tell. But looking at it now, we're looking at a race overall, which going into the next, I don't know, few, we will really have to see about how Red Bull are going to perform, because they undoubtedly look like probably still the best car. Mercedes, in my opinion, went for it and still only just could keep up with them, whereas the Red Bull and their tyres, they were able to manage them better. So they do seem to be at either a slightly higher level than the other teams, or until Ferrari get a better run, with a drier track, whether they'll be up there with them. They do seem to be the team to beat still. And whether this political riot or strife in the team will actually be the thing which will try and level things out. I'm not saying I'd want it, because it's never a good thing to have a lot of negativity, but this may be the thing that causes or could cause ramifications in future races for the team, and that they've just got to sort it out so quickly.
Yeah, and maybe this might be the one thorn in Red Bull's side. If it's not tyre wear, if they get on top of that, it may be the friction between their two drivers that causes them the problems later on.
I mean, I'm not saying for one instance that Mark Webber would do this, but if you have an irritated second driver, that can be a very it could be a very dangerous thing to have. Certainly, if it really comes down to a single point in a season.
Well, I think we've seen Mark Webber stung by Sebastian Vettel in the past, and we have been asked to move over, and he's made his feelings quite obvious that he feels like he's been treated as a number two. And then we get little instances like Brazil last year that we mentioned in our season review podcast, season preview podcast at the beginning of this year, where he was maybe squeezed a little. He squeezed Vettel a little bit more tightly than you would like the teammates to be squeezing each other. So, like you say, when you've got bad blood between the teammates, it's going to be those little instances like that could ultimately win or lose you the championship.
Do you think Webber will leave?
I don't know, because he's been in some dodgy situations before regarding team orders and feeling that he's been put down, but he signed again for this year, so maybe it's one of them sort of agreements where it's mutually beneficial to both parties. He gets a fast car if he's prepared to put up with being a number two. Maybe that's the way they look at it.
Yeah, I do wonder whether this is his last season, because there was even suggestions that they would keep him on for a second, but after this season. But yeah, it certainly looks like that's not going to be the case, and it's happened so early on as well. Could this?
Yeah, there's a lot more damage to be done.
Exactly. Could this rot set in and cause problems? So it has to be number one priority, I feel, in my opinion, for them to resolve it. Whether they'll truly resolve it, I suppose we'll only see in the races going forward.
And yeah, just to go back slightly as well to what we were saying earlier on about the tyre wear for Red Bull as well, didn't really come in as a factor today as well. Maybe an error from the team in telling Mark Webber to turn his engine down so early as well was possibly came into play, because they didn't think they may have not thought the tyres were going to last to the end under racing conditions. But as we saw, Vettel was able to just blast his way through the field, get past Mark and put a big gap in there, and still do that on the softer of the two tyres. So possibly you can maybe look at the conspiracy theories there, but obviously they did quite obviously tell him to slow down. But maybe the team could have handled that situation a bit better beforehand as well. Because if Vettel is going to make the argument, I didn't realise he was so slow because he was engine managing and saving his tyres. But why did the team not tell him that?
Yeah, that's right. So, well, actually, no, it's not the case. Back off.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And then he's been given all the facts, and he's still disobeyed a direct order. Of course, we don't get to hear all the radio that goes on, that's gone on, or we haven't heard all the radio that's gone on. But if that was said, I think he's going to have a lot harsher questions to answer to. So I think it's fair to sum up this whole story in saying that it wasn't something that we wanted to see. As fans, we definitely didn't want to see it. It just tarnished what was turning into a fairly interesting race at the end there, with the way it was going to pan out for the top four. So let's hope this kind of thing doesn't really happen again in the future, it made for a bit of interest and something to talk about. But we'd really much prefer to be talking about the racing, because that's what we enjoy watching. It's not the politics, it's not the media games, it really is the racing that we enjoy. That's not to say it didn't make things a little bit more interesting on the day, but I think this was too extreme. I felt quite deflated at the end of it and really didn't enjoy seeing three such unhappy people on the podium as well. It shouldn't be like that at the end of the race, so let's hope it doesn't go to this extreme in the future and we get a lot more good racing.
Okay, so our technical section for this podcast is the explanation on the rear wing stalling device and what exactly it is and how it helps benefit the racing cars.
Well, yep, okay, we'll go with that. Well, we'll take the wing stalling in general and how it works and what it's doing, because this isn't going to be a very long one. It's a fairly simple concept, so I'll try my best to do it as briefly, but with enough detail to go through. So, right, basically, if you think of an aeroplane wing, to generate lift, it has to pull enough air underneath it that the plane itself will then glide over the top of the air. A bit like if you imagine pushing a flat board through the water. If you angle it up, enough water will go underneath that the wing effectively will go up through the water.
Creates the lift. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
because the air passing over the top is taking longer than the air underneath, and so creates this lifting effect.
That's it, yeah. So you've got an upward pressure, so you've got the uplift there of that, and so it's easier to think of it. I think if you think of it in, say, pushing something through the water, you can actually visualize it. But that is exactly the same as what the air is doing, but obviously the air is just a lot less dense. So we've got that, and that's the lift that's been pushed up. So basically what the wings do on a Formula One car, if you look at them, they'll be curved up towards the sky. So they're having the exact opposite effect and creating, reverse lift or downforce that's pushing the car into the ground. So what the stalling is doing for the rear wing is, as that slot gap opens, they're releasing that downforce. And then you're effectively getting not a lifting effect, but you're getting the downforce removed, so the car becomes lighter, less pressed to the ground. So the effect of losing this downforce and the uplift that's created will then allow the car just to go quicker in a straight line. So that's why you'll see one car on the straight with the DRS flap closed, no rear wing stalling. The car is still firmly pressed into the ground. The car behind it, or within a second behind it, can then open that wing, alleviate a lot of that downforce. The car becomes effectively lighter, and the car will then travel quicker in a straight line. Of course, then they want to close that rear flap again as they reach a corner, because the downforce that they've had removed will make it a lot less stable and virtually impossible to get the car to turn around the corner, because the car is so much lighter. At the speeds, the car will then just want to take off and won't be able to grip the road anymore. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the podcast. We just want to say thank you to everyone who's downloaded and listened to it, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to follow us on Twitter, our username is @LightsOutRacing. If you would like to join us on our forums, just go to www.lightsoutracing.co.uk, where you can sign up for the forum and you can get involved in the podcast from there by suggesting stories that we feature in the news. And once again, that's now becoming a bit of a podcast tradition, I will leave you with our outtakes. What have we got so far? Stories from Q1 are both Mauritius looking very... hell.
Sorry, now you threw me Sam Vandergaard. Wasn't it Peak that he was a second quicker over?
So, Daddy, he's gonna be quickest on Sunday.
Right. On my bloody statement then. I'll do that again. Now.
Yeah, I think so. From what the team principal VJ... Oh, he's not the team principal, is he?
Oh, I was mucking about on the chair and just being a bit... trying to get myself comfortable. And I just sort of slipped and bashed my knee on the side of the desk.
Okay, so that's everyone eliminated.
Eliminated. I think next on our topics, I think, is obviously the Prit problems that Force India had. Prit stick.
And there we get more dodgy pit stops as well when Toro Rosso launched their...
Launched. You've got that car in your head now.